last time I looked, it's somewhere over 100 or some about 100 people in ISKCON who can initiate you. And they came up with this fantasy based on a few very small, highly controversial pieces of evidence that says Prabhupada wanted to have representatives give a ceremony, and instead of that person accepting you directly as their student, Bhakti Vikasa Swami is a good example. When you take initiation from him, and he gives you your beads, and he gives you your spiritual name, you are now a disciple of Bhakti Vikasa Swami. Well, the RtVik thing, you go through the same sort of thing, hopefully at least some ceremony of significance, but you're not actually becoming a disciple of that individual. You're becoming a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. And yes, one of their arguments is that Prabhupada did this for many, many years, well, not many years, for about maybe 4 or 5 years towards the end. Initially, Prabhupada did the initiations himself. It was a small little temple in Brooklyn, small little temple in San Francisco. He did his own initiations. But the Hare Krishna movement really just took off so fast, and there's so many people that wanted to become one of his disciples that it just was physically impossible for him to be initiating everybody himself. And he still did initiations as late as 1976 because I got my beads handed to me by Srila Prabhupada himself in Vrindavan in 1976. So it's not like he stopped doing it. It's just he couldn't do it everywhere at the rate at which people wanted to get initiated. So he authorized RtVik priests, usually it was the temple president or the local GBC, and they would send the name in, and he'd say, yes, I bless them, here are their name, do the fire sacrifice. He'd give them their beads. And they were accepted and acknowledged because Prabhupada was involved in the process to be his disciple. And there's a lot of disciples in the movement, probably more disciples who got what you would call like a RtVik initiation when he was still alive than people who got their beads handed directly to him, just because it was too difficult to logistically work that out. But for the people who are going to turn around and say, look at how critical he is, my response will be, you got to look at who the aggressor is. And they are the aggressors. As far as I'm concerned, ISKCON was going about its business, giving initiations, growing, making mistakes and trying to correct mistakes, and whatever it is, we're moving forward. And then all of a sudden, this group of people who happen to be the same group of people that started the poison conspiracy, the initial seed that was planted. Like I said yesterday, the RtVik thing came out first, and then it was taken away from the group that started it. And the group that started it were so mad, they said, well, we got to have something else to throw at ISKCON, so let's come up with the poison conspiracy. So they created that whole thing. So both of these things are big deviations. So the point I'm making is that we're not aggressing on them, we are defending ourselves from them. And we're defending ourselves from all of the crazy things that they say. And some of them, like I said, are more outspoken than others. The ones that are quiet and playing Superman and Batman in the backyard, playing RtVik Clan, whatever they want to call it, okay, that's their own little thing. As long as they're not being offensive to the devotees, personally, I'll leave them alone. You know, and hopefully they'll maybe get to come to their senses. But I don't think that's the majority of them. I may be wrong. There may be a lot of passive RtViks, but at least, and it might be a case of there's, you know, it's kind of like with the Islam tradition, there's a lot of very good, what do you call it, religiously minded Muslims, but it's those few that blew up New York that gave them a really bad name, okay, the terrorists. But that's a very small part of the Muslim tradition. So it might be that there's a very small part of the RtVik tradition. I don't know. I don't have any statistics on it. But certainly they're making a lot of noise. And they make a lot of noise, particularly on the internet. And I've been talking to a few people that they stand like outside the temple and they're canvassing some of the different places. I know in Florida there's a big problem. But I think there's big pockets of it all over the world. And we'll get to that in a little bit. So I just want to make it clear. We're not needlessly criticizing, we are defending ourselves from this really terribly destructive philosophy. And we'll see how destructive it is as it goes along. So, have we got the Wi-Fi working yet? Okay, good. So, if you look up on the screens on both sides, this was the last edition. They call it the official title, if you have, many of you may not be exposed to this, but they're very generously send me their copy of their magazine every month, and I love to read it and see all the stuff that they're putting in there, because what is it, Sun Tzu says, you got to know what your enemy's doing. So I read it and go, oh, now they're up to this, okay? So this was the last issue of the magazine that they put out. And I look at that, right on the cover of the magazine, they're admitting that they don't follow Vaishnava tradition. Because what is the Vaishnava tradition? It's the Guru Sadhu Sastra, thank you. And they are making it very clear right on the front of their magazine, we only follow Prabhupada. Forget the Sastra, forget the sadhus, we only follow Prabhupada. That's a big problem. That's a real big problem. For them, not for us, because we follow Guru Shastra Sadhu. And this point has been made all the way along the line, and it's been reinforced many, many times. Let me just look at my notes here. So this is actually the Achilles heel of the whole RtVik tradition. You really only have to understand this one point. Now, of course, they're going to deny it, and they're going to say all sorts of crazy things, but if you understand this one point, it finishes it right there. They pride themselves in saying, we follow Prabhupada, and they add on top of that, and we're right and you're wrong, and therefore, we know that Prabhupada's words are the only thing that counts. But if you only follow Prabhupada and he says, no, we follow the Guru Shastra Sadhu system, and you're not following that, then there's a contradiction there. Of course, this requires a little bit of substance between the ears to actually grasp, which maybe some of them don't have, I don't know. But I'm going to tell you one of the arguments that's been given to try to reject this Guru Shastra Sadhu thing. And what I'm going to explain is, I think maybe some of the people that aren't born in this country may not know this, but the American system is set up, we learned this in grade school, hopefully, the government. What is it? The judicial, the legislative, and the executive branch. So our founding fathers were actually brilliant people. They laid out a constitution which has made America the most powerful and wonderful country in the world from a material point of view. But it's based on those three things: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branches. And each one of those has to concur with the other ones, otherwise nothing gets done. There are a few minor exceptions, like the president can give an executive decision. And nowadays, when they do that, they usually create a whole huge political turmoil because it's not that common. And the president's the only one who can declare war against another country. So there are a few minor exceptions. But the point is that anything that's done in America has to go through the legislature. The president has to sign off on it. The House, the senators have to sign off on it. Everybody's got to sign off on it. And if it doesn't follow the Constitution, somebody will make a legal complaint. They'll take it to the judicial system. And that, frankly, that's just what happened recently with this whole Roe versus Wade abortion tradition that was just out earlier this summer. They overruled that. And the judicial system said, you know, our Constitution does not give the women a right to abort their own baby. I'm not going to go into the legal part of it, but that's basically what the decision was. So everything has to concur. So here's what the RtVik say when you say, when their argument for rejecting, or they don't reject it, they say, oh, we follow that, because anything Prabhupada says has to be agreed to with what's in the scriptures and what other the sadhus say. Where's the problem? That's what they're saying. But that's like saying, you know, whatever the president says, we follow that, and everybody agrees to that. But it's not, it doesn't. The president can say all sorts of things, but he has to have a sign-off on it from the judicial system, or they can't object to it, and the legislators. So they got it backwards. The whole purpose of this Guru Shastra Sadhu system is to protect us from, you know, a leader, and this is actually where the New Age movement, and for those of you who may be familiar and who know who David Koresh was about 20 years ago in Waco, Texas, he was considered by his disciples, if you want to call him that, to be a representative of the living entity of Jesus Christ. And of course, and there's been several others, but he's probably the one closest to home here and most likely that people would know about. And eventually he had a big confrontation, and he had a big, what do you call it, a building complex like we have here. and he was getting too controversial, and the FBI went down there, and eventually the whole complex burned to the ground. About 100 people died. Now, why did that happen? Because he did not follow the Guru Shastra Sadhu system within the Christian church, which they don't necessarily think of it that way, but because he basically declared himself independent of what the great Christian theologians have said over the generations, and because he didn't really follow the teachings of the Bible, he just declared himself to be the guru. And of course, his teachings were very erratical. I mean, he might have had some basic truths in there, but he declared himself to be an incarnation. So the Guru Shastra Sadhu said, if he had applied that, of course he won't, because he wants to be the guru. If they had applied that system, which eventually somebody did, and they said, this guy's out of control, we got to deal with him. So the way it really works is that when the point is, and there's quotes, I have them here, where Prabhupada said, no, if the spiritual master is not speaking in concordance with what the scripture says, and what the assembly of Vaishnavas and the history of our parampara says, then you reject the guru. And they're trying to flip that over on his head. And they're saying, no, Prabhupada's perfect, so therefore the scriptures is perfect, and he's only saying what the scriptures say, and he's only saying what the acharyas say. What actually the truth is, and therefore, because we only follow Prabhupada, and then here's the next thing. They say, Prabhupada said the RtVik should be, that RtVik system should go on. And I don't want to go into details, but that was in the July 9th letter, and they run around with this July 9th letter and say, see, it's in here. And basically they only have about 4 other quotes. Well, we've got about 100 quotes. So let's look at that a little bit. The concept is that Prabhupada, the system that Prabhupada actually gave was the traditional classic system of once the spiritual master passes and goes on to his next service, his disciples, the ones who are inspired to give initiation, and I believe that applies to anybody, anyone of Prabhupada's disciples, has that right. There's another thing they do is they say, I'm sure you've all heard, if you're following this argument, oh, they're rubber stamp gurus, rubber stamp gurus. Actually, it's not a rubber stamp. Ultimately anybody can give initiation underneath Prabhupada, but of course, if they're not following very nicely, it wouldn't be a very sattvic initiation. The only thing the GBC is doing is they're saying, it's kind of like the good housekeeping rubber stamp of approval, so to speak. They look at products, or another company is Consumer Reports. They look at washing machines, and they say, this washing machine outperformed all these other ones. It used less water. It makes a better wash. It doesn't take as long. And out of all of these other washing machines, this one's the best of them all. And basically, that's what the GBC is doing. They're saying, we're looking at this select group of devotees. They've been following very strictly. They're behaving, they have good behavior, they've got good relations, and they're wanting to have the rubber stamp of approval within ISKCON, so they can be accepted within the society as a blessed guru, spiritual master. And that's what they're doing. They're actually creating a screening so that you can feel pretty confident. There's no guarantee anywhere. The good housekeeping washing machine that they bless, that still might break down. So yeah, there may be still some breakdowns, but the odds are going to be a lot less than the ones that are over here that broke down after 2 weeks of running them. Basically the people, and that's what the whole New Age movement is, all these people jumping up and saying, we're going to take it disciples. And they're not within the Vaishnava parampara system. So I'm just trying to establish, this is a cheap, what they call wordsmith excuse. And when you read these things, if you're not reading it clearly and you're not thinking, like, wait a minute, what are they saying here? So here's something, another thing these people do is you could say, you can generalize or you can paraphrase something. But they'll find one word that's not quite right, and then they'll reject all the rest of it. So I'm not paraphrasing here. This is exactly what they said. This is in case of, this is the way they spelled it out. Because they only accept Prabhupada's words. And they add to that, they say, and they're trying, because they're, in order for the RtVik thing to work, they have to get the Vaishnava literatures out of the way, and they've got to get the entire sadhu community out of the way. Because the fact of the matter is that not only the I think I can safely say, I haven't done any statistics on it, but I think I can safely say the overwhelming Vaishnava community, at least the one that Prabhupada started, the overwhelming members, and I don't know what, I asked Anutama, I was working, well, this is probably the research I was doing here. I said, how many would you say, how many people are following the Krishna conscious movement now? And I think he said something like, you know, of course, obviously initiated devotees, but then also the congregation. I think he said somewhere in the area of 20,000 initiated devotees. It might have been a little bit bigger than that. But certainly, then you take all the congregation. A lot of strange people. The International Society for National Association on Mental Illness, the people that keep track of mental illness, they have said that you can, I'm sure it's probably all over the world, but at least in North America, 1/4 of the population is being treated for social mental disabilities. And they measure that based on how many people are taking these different kinds of medications. And I don't know all the names, but you know, Xanax and these medications, they're basically mood suppressors. 1/4 of the, and then they say, there's another 1/4 of the population that probably should be getting some help, but they're too proud to get help, and they're out there also. So that means basically half of the people, the Sankirtan devotees I know are seeing it every day, right? You walk up to somebody and they're like, ah, and they run away, you know, they don't know who you are, you know, and everything in between. So, yeah, but guess what? Krishna is all attractive, and people from all walks of life are attracted to him. Even the people who might be, let's just say, a little emotionally off balance, and you can take it from there, okay? So, personally, I kind of feel that, you know, the RtVik thing, I'm probably going to get slaughtered with hate mail for this, but the RtVik thing is sort of like the old Christian leper colonies. You know, for medical reasons, they couldn't interface with the normal people who were didn't have leprosy. So they created a place where they could congregate and, you know, get the food they need and housing. And there was no danger of them passing their leprosy because they already had it and they're already there and they're already dealing with it. And that's the way society worked. So actually, it is such a privilege to be part of the Hare Krishna movement and the teachings that Prabhupada gave, the straightforward, clear understanding, not this wordsmith juggling all sorts of words and twisting them around and trying to get it to fit the philosophy you want it to fit, but just the straight, and there's a whole thing, I've got it in notes here, of different ways to read the scripture. And the first thing is, just read it straight the way it is. Don't, so for example, if you say he lives on the river, well, what is he, a fish? No. So obviously, that may not be the right way to understand that. Generally, we know if he says he lives on the river, he probably lives along the side of the river, on the bank of the river. Okay? So that's a legitimate place where kind of like understanding, okay, maybe that's not a literal translation. So it requires a little, again, it requires a little bit of brain substance. It requires a little bit of, rational thinking. So, okay, so here's what they say, because we only follow Prabhupada. And to make it really clear, reading right out of their writing, the teaching, so these are the things they reject. This is their words, not mine. We reject the teachings from learned sadhus in the Gaudia Matt and elsewhere. We reject it. And another thing that I've encountered is that, and now keep in mind there's these 5 major schools, and here's another big hidden secret they don't want anybody to know. All those 5 schools are fighting with each other. They do not get along. They say, no, he doesn't have, our RtVik version is better than your RtVik version. And they, in some cases, you got to look for it. It's out there. They're saying, you're not following RtVik properly. This is what Prabhupada went. No, that's not. You know what it reminds me of? In Ojai, we're a satellite offshoot Namhata Center. And it's not convenient to go down there every weekend. It's an hour and a half away. We try to go to the major festivals and so forth. So a lot of our preaching in Ojai is kind of like stretched to, in a way, it's a challenge to go to other places that are trying to worship God, such as different churches, and in some cases, I don't want to say New Age movement because they're pretty whacked out in their own ways, but in some cases, they're a little bit more willing to hear what we have to say than other places. So we're kind of looking for out of all this stuff that's going, I call Ojai New Varanasi. It's like, all the Mayavadis are there. So it's a little hard to find a little foothold. But, every now and then we find a little, sifting through a lot of sand, you get a little nugget of gold. Hey, we found a little nugget of gold here. So, and again, remember, Sun Tzu, he's a great philosopher who wrote The Art of War. He said, you got to know what your enemy's doing. So before I retired, this is going to sound really weird, I used to go to the atheist meetings just to see what I wanted to see, what do the atheists talk about? And I wanted to see how many people showed up. And what do they do there? I mean, if they don't have anybody to worship, what are they doing all day? They're just staring at their navel? I don't know what they do. Okay? And here's what's really interesting. First of all, and I went there, I'd say probably about a half a dozen times, just to kind of make sure, did I really see that? Yeah, let me go check that out again, see if it's the same thing. And a couple points is that, first of all, about 30 people showed up. And what was really interesting, they wanted everybody to introduce themselves. And so, of course, I said something very kind of non-informative, so to speak, because I didn't want to create I just wanted to go there as a neutral person. But what I was interesting to find out was that out of the 30 people who were there, about 15 or 20% were people who were just looking. They weren't even sure what they believed. And they were just kind of like checking. They go to church, they go to the atheist meeting, they go do yoga, they hug trees, they do all sorts of stuff. And they're trying to figure out, what makes sense for them. So that was like probably half of the people there. And then there were other people that were there who, they're a little bit more convinced, and they go, yeah, so far, I haven't been convinced by anything. And those are the people I'm going like, yeah, let's go see, maybe we can, actually talk to them. They tell you, have you ever heard of the Hare Krishna movement? A lot of people there are trying to figure out what to do. So but what was interesting, out of that group of 30 some odd people, there was only maybe 3 or 4 people who were actually hardcore atheists. Nope, I'm absolutely convinced there is no God. And of course, Krishna will say, great, he's detached. Say, okay, great, have fun, have at it, go for it. And one other point in this direction, I actually, when I worked for the Navy at the Department of Defense, there was one guy in my office, he was actually a good friend of mine on a technology level, we respected each other. And he said things like, you know, he'd go like, hey, Bill, do you believe in the fairy godmother too that puts the money under your pillow at night? You know, do you believe in all the gods and Zeus and all this other? I mean, he always kind of, and I would just defer to him and kind of, you know, one of our biggest debates was, you know, evolution. And I threw at him, Prabhupada was brilliant, right? He said, life does not come from chemicals, it comes from life. So when he was on his throne one day making fun of me, I said, well, you know, there's no examples of life coming from chemicals, but I can give you a whole lot of examples of chemicals coming from life. And that just shut him up for a while. He couldn't figure out how to deal with that. So he said, you're laughing at me, but you believe in something that's completely absurd. There's no example of it anywhere. But I believe in something that there's millions of examples of it. Chemicals come from life. So anyhow, the point is, I asked him at one point when he was on one of these roles, and I said, hey, Doug, I said, so are you going to tell me that you are 100% convinced that there is absolutely no God? It's just impossible. And when I put it to him that way, he kind of was a little bit, he went, whoa, whoa, well, okay, maybe 99% chance that he's, he put like a fraction of a percent. Okay, well, maybe, you know, he was kind of like doing the, what is it, the mathematicians thing, you know, better to have at least some hook out there in case he's wrong. That's good. So the point is that when I went to the atheist meeting, this is the same problem the RtViks have. These warring RtVik fashions, they don't get along with each other. So one of the meetings I went to, all these atheists were standing around and saying, you know, we got to come up with a new name because atheist has such a negative connotation. And one of the names that's been kicked around, although I don't think they agreed on it, was the word bright. And they got this, by the way, they think they're so bright, right? So they want to be known as brights. I don't think it ever really took off, and there's probably some other words out there. And forgive me for making maybe a socially inappropriate analogy here, but the old days, the people who were what we now refer to as gay, I don't know how many of you know this, but years ago, they had much more kind of negative, I won't repeat them, but there were negative connotations. And they didn't like those negative connotations. And they said, we got to get rid of this. This is too much of a bad label. And they said, let's just call ourselves gays. And that actually stuck. So the poison people are trying to figure out, we got to get away from this word atheist. So that's one thing. They couldn't agree on that. But here's something that's even more interesting. They want their own 10 commandments, their own atheistic 10 commandments. And so each meeting they're saying, well, what about this, you know, to treat people nicely and be friendly to everybody. And, you know, okay. But here and apparently this discussion's been going on for I don't know how many years. But the important point is, and this is where the analogy is to the RtViks, they could never settle on anything because they were so proud. And every one of them thought they were smarter than the other guy. Because the concept of being humble and accepting authority from advanced scripture, because we all know if you have imperfect senses, a propensity to cheat, a propensity to be under illusion, and the propensity to, make mistakes, thank you. You know, I mean, when I first heard that, you know, I've given lectures before about how if I didn't find the Hare Krishna movement, I'd probably be an atheist. But when I ran into those 4 things, I went, whoa, 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 whoa. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how can I get around that? How can I figure out a way to get around that? And after, I don't know, 2 or 3 months of just, I can't. Okay, I guess I got to surrender. That's kind of that's what it was for me. You know, to be honest with myself, I said, I can't defeat that. So if I really want to grow in my awareness and in my, you know, like they say in the Navy, be all you can be, I got to recognize that I'm not going to do it on my own. And by the way, that's part of the big problem with the whole RtVik thing. It's all on you. Because that guru, that person who initiated you, once he theoretically gives you your beads, he's out of the picture. Which also raises an interesting question. Who do you give your guru dakshing to? Right? Who do you give your guru dakshing to? Because he's not your guru. Well, how are you going to give it to Prabhupada? Oh, when Prabhupada said ISKCON is his body, well, you ought to give your dakshing to us. You know, there's a lot of course, you got to have a little bit of foresight to think of these things. And, you know, you wonder how much foresight are there for the people who are falling for this whole charade. So anyway, let me get back to the four things he says. So they say, this is their words, we reject the teachings from learned sadhus and the Gaudia Matt. And by the way, the entire Gaudia Matt thinks this RtVik thing is just one of these crazy things the Western people came, those Westerners, man, they're still having a hard time understanding what we're teaching, right? So they're rejecting all that. And I believe, I want to be careful here because I haven't done thorough study on it, but I believe the other three sampradayas, we're the Brahma sampradaya, I believe the other three sampradayas more or less have the same attitude. I think in the Ramanuja sampradaya there's a little bit of a, I'm not sure the details of it, but I think in their situation is you're initiated as a disciple of Ramanuja, but there's a priest who does the initiation, and he's the one who guides you every step of the way. It's not like he bails out. Now, in one of the RtVik camps, they say the person who does the RtVik initiation then has the moral responsibility to continue to guide you and give you guidance. But guess what? If you're a RtVik and you don't like the guy that initiated you, or you decide later that he's a jerk, you just walk out and go do whatever you want. Go find somebody else as a RtVik and take instruction from them. Because there's no moral bind. There's no philosophical bind. Whereas one of the things about the initiating process is, and then there's a whole nother, I'm kind of hitting at things as they come up in my head here, but there's this whole thing of what is Diksha? And there's a debate, so is it a ceremony? Is it, what is it? You know, Diksha is, you know, there's so many discussions. And after studying a lot of this, this is my realization, I could probably provide some evidence to it. The Diksha is actually the moment you realize what I realized when I realized I can't get around those four little imperfections. I just can't get around it. So I need to go to some source. By the way, this is exactly the opposite of what the New Age teaches, because the New Age teaches more or less, and there's different flavors of that too. You just go and you sit and you go, you do all this sort of stuff, and you will be magically blessed with a bolt of lightning and you will become completely realized. Well then, why do you keep doing it if you're completely realized? You know, it's like, and why are you so sad, and why are you having all these problems? Why are the police chasing you, and why'd your wife leave you, and all this other stuff? If you're so realized, I mean, it's like, I haven't seen many, you know, I mean, I'm being a little facetious here, but the point is that the New Age movement rejects the concept, or excuse me, they promote the concept that you can do it on your own. It's basically heaven on earth without God is their concept. But if you understand these four flaws, you go, no, I cannot do it on my own. I have to go to some higher authority. And so in the Christian tradition, I think most of the Westerners probably have some familiarity with the Christian tradition. There's what they refer to as the altar call. Is everybody familiar with that term, the altar call? We've seen some heads going this way. So in the Christian tradition, frequently when they do one of their big public outreaches, they'll, like in Ojai, for example, they did a big play of one of Jesus' pastimes in the public park. And it was very nice. It was a nice rendition of the teachings in the Bible. And then when it was all over, and they passed the hat for people to give a donation. And then the minister got up at the end and he said, okay, and if you've realized now that you want to give your life to Christ, come down to the front of this theater and we will bless you and we'll say a prayer with you and you will now be saved by Jesus Christ. And the principle is actually okay, other than the fact that sometimes it's a little awkward and weird the way they do it. But the principle is, at that moment, they've had their own realization that I can't do it on my own. And they want somebody to help them. And frankly, as devotees, we need to respect the fact, at that point, who knows what they know or how much they've been exposed to it. They're choosing as their guru, Jesus Christ. And they're surrendering to him. And that's where the moment of diksha occurs, is when you surrender. When you get to that point where you say, I'm done with my mind, I need help. And I throw of course, in our movement, the idea is maybe even physically, throw yourself on the ground and say, Prabhuji, please guide me. I need help. I can't do this on my own. And that's the very thing the RtViks are throwing out. Now, they say, we accept what Prabhupada says. Except for Prabhupada has what is referred to in the medical industry as locked-in syndrome. Does anybody know what locked-in syndrome is? It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a medical condition that's so severe that the person is in a body, they have no way to communicate other than maybe blinking their eyes or just moving a tip of their finger. They're basically paralyzed, but their mind is completely aware. And they could be very, very smart and very intelligent and have all sorts of emotions and feelings, but they can't communicate it. So if you accept Prabhupada, you know, it's like, well, how do you know when Prabhupada's not happy with what you're doing? And what Bhakti Vikasa Swami was saying this morning in the class was, yeah, I mean, even within our own movement, we find people kind of like slipping a little bit, and the mind's kind of, I can do this, and I can do that. Well, where's the person to say, hey, Prabhu, you know, you're getting a little bit lazy getting the Mangalarti here. Where is that coach? The spiritual master's a coach. Now, has anybody gotten to the Olympics without a coach? I mean, think about it. The people who go to the Olympics, they usually have, and maybe even more than one coach in that case. But somebody will probably come up with an example and prove me wrong here. But as far as I understand, I don't think anybody makes it to the Olympics without a coach. Okay? And it's just the Olympics. Okay, so you can stand on your head and twirl and jump off a beam and flip your, you know, run a race or whatever it is, you know. You're using the body to these extremes which people are fascinated by. But what about getting out of the material world? We don't need a coach for that. And the coach has to have the ability to saying, you're doing that wrong. Now, if it's a golf coach, for example, you're swinging the wrong, you're twisting, you know, and whatever it is, they tell you want to get better, then stop doing that habit. That's what a coach is. Spiritual master is the coach. And the RtViks are saying, well, we have a wonderful coach. He listens, and he listens, and he doesn't tell us anything. He never talks back. He's just a picture on the wall. They say they read the books. But I gave the example yesterday, when even Prabhupada was here, how somebody made that comment, you know, or Prabhupada made the comment that, you know, these ladies were following apostasy all year long. He said, oh, that's very good. He says, grains are for the horses or the animals. And then a year later, he went to the temple and they said, we're not eating grains. And he said, why not? He said, well, you said you should. They thought he had said we shouldn't eat grains. We had that one little comment. And Prabhupada was furious. He said, I never said that. I eat grains. What do you think? I'm a horse? And of course, he killed it. But that's the kind of misunderstandings that come up if your guru is basically silent on everything. And you interpret what you want. You are going to decide what you want. So that's the first thing. They reject the learned sadhus and they reject the Gaudia Matt. Basically everybody else except for them in the Vaishnava tradition. Here's the next thing. This is their words. They can't tell me I'm misquoting them. I took it right out of their literature, at least one of the branches of their literature, because who knows what the other branches believe. But at least this is the most visible and vocal branch. We reject consulting the books of the previous acharyas, not translated and commented on or directly approved by the current link and present acharya Srila Prabhupada. We reject it. If Prabhupada didn't talk about it, we reject it. Well, what about the Hari Bhakti Vilas? Prabhupada talked about that. And the Hari Bhakti Vilas has a whole, about 50 or 100 verses about the relationship a person has with their spiritual master. And how, I think maybe some of you have run into this. There's a part in there where it says, while you're becoming qualified or wanting to seek initiation, you demonstrate your sincerity by what? Fetching water, because back then they didn't have public, water systems and built-in water. You had to go to the well. So you bring the water to your spiritual master, so he has water, gets the sticks, or cow dung, maybe if it's in India, so they can burn the fire. You do the menial services. And then when he sees that you're committed, then he says, oh, I'm convinced you're serious about Krishna consciousness. And so you have this, it's like in the law world, when you do a contract, you have to have both sides of the party making a commitment to that contract. The word in the legal world is called consideration. So when you buy something from a store, you're giving money to the merchant, and the merchant is giving you whatever the product or the service is that you want. Both parties are giving something to the arrangement. So in the contract with the spiritual master is you give a commitment to serve him, and you're getting the better end of the deal by a long shot. And he gives you the commitment that if you serve me politely, responsibly, devotionally, I will take you back to Godhead. Whoa. Just do that for one life. Who's getting the better end of the deal? Right, we're getting the better end of the deal. Okay? But that has to be there. How can that be there when Prabhupada is gone? He's not dead. That's another thing they say. Oh, you're saying he said no. But Prabhupada said when the body, right after the person leaves the body, I think most of us have heard this, he says, he's gone. The body's still there, but the soul is gone. So Prabhupada, certainly alive, but he's not in the body that we put in the ground in Vrindavan. He's gone. He's gone on to his next service. And you can have a relationship with him in the sense of being inspired endlessly, which I think, obviously, for the senior devotees who are here, have been inspired for the last 40 or 50 years. So that's there. But as far as knowing whether or not, you should have an extra glove jamming, or whether you should, go out and do bush shooting. I mean, if it's all left up in your own mind, well, it's your own mind. And that's, by the way, that's why the senior godbrothers are bonding together to help each other along the way, because we do have that relationship. That's the sadhu community, and we're going to get to that in a minute. They reject that too, by the way, but we'll get to that. So they're saying, we don't accept any of these other literatures. Well, Prabhupada talked about the Hari. Oh, well, you can hear it now. They're going to get this video, and they're going to say, well, he only talked about those verses in the Hari Bhakti Vilas. He didn't talk about those other verses. Okay, well, it says here that if he talked about the Hari Bhakti Vilas, you'll accept that. Well, why don't you accept what it says about becoming qualified and the exchange you have with the spiritual master? I have a big, huge paragraph here. I'm paraphrasing a lot of stuff just so we can cover a lot of material. But if you're interested in these verses, I can give them to you. They're very clearly evident a relationship with a human being and another human being. And that's what the Hari Bhakti Vilas says. And there's others. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so the third thing they say, this is great. I mean, they make it very clear. They say, we reject the stories and testimonies from devotees of what they supposedly heard, learned, and understood from Srila Prabhupada. So basically, if you don't agree with us, we reject it. If you don't agree with our interpretation, we reject it. Okay, there you go. Now, okay, I'm going to read this quote. There are a few places where reading the quotes pretty much speak for themselves. I've already kind of laid this out, so you may see where I'm going with this. But here's the way they reject. Remember the legislative, the judicial, and the executive branch of the American government, this is how they reject, this is their words, the Guru, Shastra, Sadhu, or this is how they avoid that. They think they're following it, and here's the way they think it. Sometimes the Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra principles is invoked as an excuse to try to go outside Srila Prabhupada's words. That's exactly what we're saying. You're not following what Prabhupada said. But this makes no sense, since all three, the Guru, the Shastra, and the Sadhu, are always in line, and therefore, one does not need to independently verify Srila Prabhupada's statements with any of the other sources. Thus, there is never any need to directly quote any sources other than Srila Prabhupada to establish the connection, thus establish the conclusions regarding what Srila Prabhupada said. So that's like saying, well, whatever the president says is right, because of course the legislator and the judicial branch will agree with it. But that's not the way it works. You have to have concurrence. And that's the very thing they have to snuff out. Because the overwhelming sadhu community, as we already stated, completely rejects this whole RtVik thing. They completely reject it. The point is that the sadhus in the scripture are there, and Prabhupada specifically states, if I'm teaching something which is not consistent with what the scriptures say, or with what the great acharyas have said in our lineage, then I should be rejected. And they're saying just the opposite. They're saying, well, Prabhupada is perfect, so there's not going to be any inconsistency. Well, Prabhupada was very perfect, but he didn't teach the RtVik thing. He taught the tradition that, you know, the disciples will soon become the initiating spiritual master. But they got to throw that out. They got to crush that, because that's not what they're trying to promote. So they come up with this very convoluted, cheap excuse to throw out the sadhus and the sastras, scripture, the sadhus and the sastra. So when they quote Prabhupada, they cherry-picked the quotes that they want. This is actually where the whole argument with the RtViks really gets bogged down. You know, they have a few little quotes. And this is, by the way, it's the same problem that came up with the poison conspiracy, which eventually, maybe it was a absence of fraud, I guess, when they admitted that Prabhupada never said he was poisoned. They admitted that. And yet, that's what they all keep on repeating. Now, Prabhupada said he was poisoned. No, he didn't. You don't even follow your own people. You don't even know what your own people are saying. Okay? Let me just see what I got here. Okay, so keep in the middle the Shastra, the scriptures. Yes, if spiritual master, this is a quote from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Remember, books are the most hardcore teachings. There's a lot of, discussions going on that if it's in a letter, well, maybe it was only meant for that individual, although they pull out whatever letters they think are appropriate for what they want. But I think everybody agrees that there's sort of a hierarchy. If it's in Prabhupada's books, it is the strong, because it's meant for the next 10,000 years. It's not given to some individual. And the next thing just below that is the lectures, the public lectures, and I think just a little bit below that, we're talking about the urgency or the legitimacy, or it's all legitimate, but the authority of it is higher when he's talking in a public lecture than when he's in his room giving personal darshan, maybe to a couple individuals that he's giving personal instruction to. So we recognize that. But this is coming from the Bhagavatam. So what does it say here? It says, I'll read the whole thing. If you want to know what if you want to know what is a spiritual master, if you know who is a saintly person, then you should keep in the middle the Shastra, the scriptures, and you will be and you will collaborate. Prabhupada uses sometimes English language a little bit hard to read. The saintly person, the spiritual master, and the Shastra collaborate if they are all abiding one and another. Yes, if the spiritual master says something which is not in the Shastra or the scripture, that is not good. You follow Prabhupada? Well, follow that instruction. Don't turn around and throw out the scriptures. Don't turn around and throw out the sadhus. Because Prabhupada's saying, no, if he's saying, and guess what? He's not saying you can do a RtVik initiation. He's saying you do a traditional initiation. That's what he's saying. You speak a pure devotee. Okay, this is actually a letter to a devotee, so maybe not quite as strong, but still it's expressing what he feels. You speak of pure devotee, that he is Shaktivish avatar, that we should obey him only. These things are the wrong idea. If anyone thinks like that a pure devotee should be obeyed and no one else, that means he is a nonsense. We advise everyone to address one another as Prabhu. Prabhu means master. So how the master should be disobeyed? Others, they are also pure devotees. They're not, incompetent idiots. Prabhupada's saying they're pure devotees. All of my disciples are pure devotees. Anyone sincerely serving the mission of the spiritual master is a pure devotee. I mean, that's why we have to be so careful amongst ourselves. And we don't know, we don't know who we're talking to. So I like to say, err on the side of caution. Respect everybody. We don't know. There's a lot of young devotees coming up. Go out there and radically change the whole world, And Prabhupada's saying they're pure devotees. They're not incompetent. He's not. This is written in 1972. He wasn't thinking they're all going to drop the ball and so they're so messed up that I can't trust any of them to initiate anybody. That's the argument that you hear all the time. Prabhupada didn't think his devotees could do anything. Well, if Prabhupada was so incapable of making any devotees that significantly sincere and dedicated in their devotion, why do you want to take initiation from him? If he's that, if you don't have the confidence that he actually was able to effectively change the hearts and at least a certain majority of his disciples, why do you want to take initiation from him? It sounds like he was not capable of doing that. So I want to make a little side diversion here. Both with the poison conspiracy and the RtVik conspiracy, or the RtVik-Charade, don't make the mistake of thinking that it's about those issues. It's not. It's not about the whole fantastic story they came up about Prabhupada was poisoned and blah, 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 blah. And it's not about Prabhupada wanted. This is like, it's like the wife who's going to therapy and she's complaining because her husband is going out playing golf every weekend. And she's complaining to her therapist, my husband's going out playing golf every weekend. It's not about the golf. It's about the fact that the husband's not cutting the grass and he's not washing the car and he's not helping raise the kids. So it's not about this RtVik stuff, and it's not about the poison thing. It's about people who don't want to surrender because they think they can do it on their own. That's what it's really about. And they're too proud to even take a minute and actually stop and think about that. At least it's appear. The thing is, I don't know how many people have defected from the RtVik thing. You hear about all the people who were, again, wounded or damaged or irate about, and I apologize for whoever might have hurt your feelings or treated you inappropriately. I'm sure it's happened, probably way more than it should have. But you can't judge the entire Hare Krishna movement based on the behavior of just a few individuals. Or because you got a hard, you got a bad deal. I had a lot of things done to me that I thought, like, wait a minute, how can a devotee, and I said, okay, wait a minute. That's just that individual. If I look at the entire Hare Krishna movement, it's like, I'm blown away by how some people in this movement are just so incredibly knowledgeable and sweet and loving and kind and dedicated and hardworking. I mean, you hear stories of people that are just doing their service. The thing is, you generally don't even know too much, unless you live in the temple where this is going on. You generally don't even know some of the things that people are coming in late at night to clean the entire temple, and they do their service, and you don't even know who it is. And they're not asking for any attention. They're actually really humble. They're not looking for a pat on the back. They're not looking for put my name in a newsletter or whatever. And I'm not trying to deride anybody who's getting that either. There's certain people that deserve acknowledgement. But the point is that acknowledgement always comes with the risk of getting proud, and that's where problems come in. We don't want to get proud, and we certainly don't want to do things just so that I can see, look, me, I'm so wonderful. But that's the wrong reason. You're doing it because that's your skill, that's your talent, that's your dharma. And if you're good at your dharma, you're probably going to exceed in it, and that's the proper way to look at it. And if you're not in your dharma, then you might have to look at something else. That's another problem within the movement. Sometimes people are, there's an old expression in America called going postal. I don't know if how many people know what that means? Going postal. Okay, most Americans know. Okay, for those who don't know, some of the Western foreigners here, years ago, getting a job at the post office isn't really that difficult. If you're an American citizen and you can read addresses on a letter and take it over to the house and deliver it, you pretty much, if they need you, you'll get in. The problem is especially if you're in a financially distressed situation, people will join the post office, but with all respect to our postal workers, it's really a pretty simple, standardized job. You go to work, they put a whole stack of letters in front of you. You have to, they're sorted by street, or maybe you sort it by street, and you figure your route, and you put it in the thing, and you go around and you do it every day. You go around doing it every day. And the thing is, if you happen to be a high intellectual person, it's like torture. People who are highly intellectual, they like, solving problems and building spaceships and, tracking down the bad guys in the police. They got minds that are like, they're active minds. And after 5 years of working in the post office, they finally can't handle it anymore, and they just go out and they either kill themselves or kill a bunch of people, and it's called going postal. They just can't handle it anymore. So the reason why I bring that up is that if you're in the wrong dharma, if you're not meant to be, and I don't want to use any particular branch or service, but whatever service you're in, if you're feeling like, I would be much better, I'll use myself as an example. I joined the Radha Damodar Temple. As a matter of duty, I went out on Sankirtan for 6 months or a year. I didn't really feel like that was my service. And I felt a need to say no, and I think after 40 years, I think I made the right decision. I said, no, I could be more valuable to the Hare Krishna movement doing other things, and you can look at my resume out on my website if you want to see all the other things I did. And most of my godbrothers will say, yeah, you did the right thing. And I'm not minimizing book distribution. I fall at the feet of the book distributors because it's a talent I don't have. So we need to be in our own dharma. And probably a lot of the people that spun off into this RtVik thing could very well be, they came to the Krishna consciousness movement and they needed pot washers at some temple, and they had them washing pots, and they had like a PhD in nuclear science or something, And he's like, wait a minute, you don't put a guy with a PhD in nuclear science washing pots for 6 months. Okay, a little bit to, the humility and, testing a little bit. But he's obviously much more capable than that. So yeah, that might be a problem that occurred, which is why people went off in this other direction. Okay, so actually, what time am I supposed to stop for a break? I know there's a break in. Huh? Oh. How long do I go for? So that'll be about 35 minutes from now? Whole page of testimonies from Prabhupada's disciples who said, and Prabhupada himself, I have the quote here, Prabhupada himself, he said, he didn't even want to go see Bhakti Siddhana. His buddy, when he was 25 or whatever, he was a young man at the time. And somebody said, hey, you gotta go check this guy out, man. It's like, whoa. And Prabhupada, he was an educated man, and there's so many, the sampradayas, and back then there was a lot of gurus running around. It's kind of what we have now with the whole New Age movement, And at some point he was like, and his father taught him very nicely as a young boy to Radha Krishna worship. And he said, I don't want to go see some guru, It's like, and he said, no, you got to go check it out. And he made the right decision. He went to see Bhakti Siddhana. And there's a very, if I can find it here, I'll read it, but I don't want to take too much time looking for it. But he basically said, that day changed my entire life. Bhakti said, I'm paraphrasing it. That day changed. It was, and he said it was one of the most glorious moments in my entire life. And he was just like, whoa, I wasn't expecting this at all. He understood that Bhakti Siddhanta was on a whole different wavelength than all the other so-called gurus that were running around in Calcutta at the time. It completely changed his life, being in the presence of Bhakti Siddhanta. And I think if I were to ask, a lot of people here would say being in the presence of their spiritual master, whoever it happens to be, had an important impact on you where you eventually surrendered to them and you said, I want to be part of this and I want to help my spiritual master get Lord Chaitanya's message out to the rest of the world because this message has been so important in my life. I want to see if I can give it to everybody. And another thing the RtViks say in their incredible, I don't want to be insulting, but where's the order? The order is there by Lord Chaitanya. You take this Krishna conscious movement to everybody you see, and you tell them about Krishna, of Bhagavad Gita, and of the Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm giving the order. And Prabhupada said, we follow Lord Chaitanya's order. So there's the order. They're saying there is no order. There's the order right there. Don't minimize it. Don't trivialize it. Don't say it doesn't exist in order to rationalize and justify your really, really selfish idea that I'll take initiation from Prabhupada and then I'm on my own to do whatever I want. Of course, they'd say, no, you're not. You have to follow what Prabhupada says. And, well, I can read Prabhupada's books any way I want. And don't think it doesn't happen in other traditions. I happen to know for a fact, I don't know how many people are aware of this or not, but there's a whole thing called the neo-Nazi movement. It's a very ugly, racist, discriminatory. Basically, it's, I'm white, you're not, I'm better than you, end of discussion. You know, it's probably a lot more nastiness than that. But that's the basic attitude of the neo-Nazi movement. And they're the ones who are saying, send all the Asian people back to Asia and send all the, you know, the black Americans to Africa. That's where they belong. I mean, it's a very, very ugly racist movement. And you know where they get their inspiration from? You'll never guess it. The Bible. They interpret the Bible to justify their very racially hatred. So you don't think people are going to take Prabhupada's book? Bhakti Vikasa Swami was just giving a lecture the other day, and he was saying there's somebody in South India reading Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita and sitting there and finding fault with everything he said. It's already going on. So how is that going to be preserved? How is what Prabhupada, the proper understanding of what he's teaching, going to be preserved if all these people are running around saying, well, I'm Prabhupada's disciple and I read his books and this is what I think he said. And if you don't like it, guess what? I'm going to start my own RtVik. I'm going to do my own RtVik thing. I'll start the next division of RtVik. There's already 5, at least 5. There may be more, I don't know. But I know there's at least 5 right now. And they've only been around 20 years. There's still only one main ISKCON, by the way. But there's 5 branches of RtVik out there fighting with each other. Which historically isn't really unexpected. In Buddhism, the original Buddhism was Theravada Buddhism. And then what happened was that was very strict. You know, it was kind of like our ISKCON. You come to the temple, you chant your mantras, you study the teachings of Buddha. And then the rest, then a certain part of the population was like, well, that's a little bit too tough. That's a little bit too difficult. So let's kind of loosen up the ropes here a little bit. And that's where the I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but the Mahavayana, I don't know exactly how, but that's when the second division of Buddhism came along. And they made it more available to the general public. And actually in Christianity, a similar thing happened. The original, shortly after Jesus Christ left, you had the Essenes. They were the vegetarians. They were the ones who lived in the mountains. They were the austere followers of Jesus Christ. And somewhere along the line, apparently, the Catholic Church decided, well, you know, let's make it a little bit more available here. Let's throw out this vegetarian stuff. And, you know, they came up with their tradition of Christianity, the Catholic tradition. What's that? Yeah, I could only eat meat on Friday. Oh, something like that. Or couldn't eat it on Friday. You can eat it all the rest of the week, but you can't eat it on Friday. Right? So again, it's our human nature. Things are, it's easy to deviate. It's easy to start taking these other branches. So I don't personally, this lecture is not meant for the hardcore militants who are going to be putting me up on the next page of Back to Operod magazine, and they're going to try to take all my words and twist them around and say, Marshall doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Don't listen to him. I'm actually expecting it. I'll be a little disappointed if they don't do it, because it's just too much common sense. Show me how you can get out of this loop, Guru Shastra Sadhu. Saying that Prabhupada's obviously right because the sadhus and the scriptures agree with it is such a twisted, inverted statement that I can't believe people follow that kind of stuff. But then again, remember, Prabhupada said no crazies and no lazies. So Lord Chaitanya created a major branch of the at least I don't even want to call it the Hare Krishna movement. He created some weird thing that's going on over there, which doesn't accept the philosophy that they say Prabhupada, they accept Prabhupada. Well, he said, then you follow the Shastra. You follow the other tradition, the scriptures. But they're not doing that. They come right out and said they're not going to do it. So let's get into, we've got a few more minutes and then I'll ask for questions. I just wanted, this is an important point. Just my computer's jumping around here. So Prabhupada instructed us on everything. How to use the restroom, how to use the loda, how to dress the deities. He was down to even telling the pujaris what kind of colors the deities should be dressed in. And all the, I mean, I'm not a pujari, but I have respect for the pujaris, all the traditions that they have to go through to worship the deities properly. How to cook. He taught us how to cook prasadam. We didn't know anything about, us Westerners, salt and pepper, that's it. Maybe cinnamon if you're a little bit more thoughtful. But the whole list of spices that came out of India, whoa, he taught us how to use all that. How to worship the Brahmin, have respect for the Brahmins, right? Health and bathing, decorating the temple. He gave us details on everything. Fasting and Ekadasi. And these RtVik people are trying to tell us, let me just see if it's here, that basically 4 quotes in early 1977, the July 9th letter, and that's where they hang their philosophical hat on. But think about this for a minute. Taking initiation is such an important, serious part of becoming a devotee. I mean, it's a big moment for somebody to take initiation. It's like that altar call in the Christian church. I mean, some people go up at the altar and they're crying. Oh, I'm such a sinner. Oh, please, Jesus, save me. I mean, I'm not trying to make fun of it. It's a very emotional thing for some people. And same thing with initiation. It should be an emotional thing. You found your spiritual master, and you're making a contract with him, and you're both putting in the consideration. You're going to do what he says, and he's going to take you back to Godhead. And there's just one reference off the top of my head. Virabahu wrote a book in Virabahu Prabhu Maharaj, devotee, and he preaches predominantly in South America. He wrote a book called The Guru and What Prabhupada Said. And in the back of the book, he's got about 50 quotes, and they're pretty clear. I expect all my disciples to take their own disciples. And these guys have 4 highly controversial little, it's like the poison thing, I am being poisoned. Well, now that was made up. In this case, not necessarily made up, but okay, so here's Prabhupada. He's meticulous about everything, and then in the last 6 months of his life, he decides, I'm going to change everything that I've said for the last 12 years. And the allegation is because my disciples are so incompetent that I have to take that role. And actually, for those of us who actually had a little bit of a chance to have association with Srila Prabhupada, it is so not his mood. It is just not his mood. He would cry in appreciation for the fact I mean, it's always astonishing for us. There's a few occasions where he's on the Vyasan, and he was crying in this effect of, you're all worshiping me, but I haven't done anything. You guys have done it all. You went out and sold the books. You're the ones who built the temples. You're the ones who are holding the Rath Yatra festivals. You're the ones who are doing all this work. I'm just writing these books. I mean, it's the mood of a humble devotee. I mean, what do you mean just writing these books? You're writing these books for the next 10,000 years. It's going to radically change the whole world. And don't say you're not doing anything. You're inspiring the whole world to do the vision that you have. And then they're saying at the last moment, in the 12 years that he preached, you know, all that stuff I said about you guys taking, you know, getting your own disciples. Yeah, I didn't really mean that. You know, I mean, you're just so incompetent. You know, actually, I'll tell you what, I'm going to do this great thing for the rest of the world. And I'm just going to, you know, this RtVik letter, I want that to go on forever. And you guys just hold these little RtVik-Charade ceremonies. And you know, I'll just trust you all. And you can do these things. And I'll take the karma for everybody for the next 10,000 years. It's like, no. If he wanted to change everything so radically, he would have issued, you know, and their big thing, remember, this is a letter. They say, yeah, but it was a letter to the entire movement. No, if Prabhupada wanted to make such a radical change to the tradition of the Vaishnava system of initiation, he wouldn't have put it cryptically in a few comments here and there. He would have written a major paper as to why, because, you know, their argument is well, Prabhupada had the liberty, you know, in America, he allowed women on the altar, and, you know, and he wore a watch, and these aren't really things that the Acharyas usually do, and he took planes, and he did all this other stuff, and, you know, and in India, they don't do that stuff, but Prabhupada, he was a powered, you know, Vaishnava, and he could change whatever he wanted. He could even change the scripture if he wanted to, and in fact, that's what he did. He changed the tradition. We're not going to accept that Hari Bhakti Vilasa anymore, because Prabhupada said, you don't need to do that. Really? Except for that quote that Prabhupada said, if I'm not following the scriptures, then I should be rejected. Now, Prabhupada said that. You guys said you follow Prabhupada. Well, what do you do about that one? So this is the kind of really gross cheating that goes on. And not everybody has the time or maybe the intellectual capacity or even the desire to do the research. But we're maybe another 10 minutes or so. I'm going to stop here. I could go on for another 2 hours, but we don't have the time. And if anybody would like to ask any questions or if there's anything that's not clear, we've got a couple of minutes to deal with that. Prabhuji. Okay, let me see if I can find that. That's a very legitimate question. Hold on here. He wants to know. No, that's fine. Prabhupada said, here, well, this isn't quite what you're asking for, but let me just read this. This is really good. This is from Adi Leela. Acharya means he must spread. So same thing, entrusting to another devotee. And who spreads? He's Acharya. Acharya, we should not jump over Krishna without the help of a guru. That is not possible. Then, when we are completely 100% following Acharya, then you can also act as an Acharya. This is the process. Then it is better than to become Acharya because we are interested in preparing Acharyas. This is another little word juggling game. No, he just wanted to have Shiksha gurus, no Diksha gurus. I don't think Acharya means somebody who's initiating. Okay. Anyhow, I could read more on that one, but I want to see if I can find the one that you just asked for in the Hari Bhakti Vilas. Yeah. Okay. No, I should be able to find it. Any other questions while I'm looking for it? Go ahead.
Hare Krishna. So I don't have most of the background here. I have understood some things about RtVik philosophy. It seems one of your main points is...
I don't know if that microphone's working.
So, it seems one of the main points is that the RtVik school does not accept Shastra or sadhus, and they think that because they believe that accepting Prabhupada's words automatically is in line with Shastra and sadhu. So other than the living guru, are there other places where Prabhupada is saying something that does not align with what Shastra says?
I'm not sure if I heard that correctly, but the point is that Prabhupada's saying, if I am not speaking what's consistent that you find in the scriptures, such as the Hari Bhakti Vilas, and there's another one, I think I've got it here. Actually, there's more than one. And if I'm not saying what our lineage of acharyas have taught over the generations, then I should be rejected.
Yeah, understood. But are there anything that Prabhupada says which actually does not align with the previous lineage of acharyas or with the Shastras?
Well, I gave the example of, the first one that comes to mind is, like, for example, in America, Prabhupada, he was explaining to his godbrothers who were in India, he's saying, you know, because he was being criticized, you're letting women live in the temple and you're letting them do all these things. You'd never get that in South India. So they were criticizing him. And then Prabhupada said, well, for preaching in Lord Chaitanya's movement, the goal is to get the information out there. And he basically said, how can I reject a young lady who wants to be a devotee of Krishna? And what am I going to do? Send him back out into that world where she's going to be preyed upon by everybody on the face of the earth, practically, young women? No, I want them to be protected within the ashram and the devotees association. He wanted the women always to be protected. And he only had so many resources. So that is a radical change from the tradition that was followed in South. So they say, because he did that, he also has the right to change, to do what's not in the scripture. You understand what their rationale is? Because Prabhupada had the right to do that, he also has the right to say, well, you don't need to follow it, Hari Bhakti Vilas, because I'm telling you, you don't need to do it.
So I'm a little confused. So when Prabhupada says something which is not in line with the traditional Vaishnava tradition, is it that RtVik say we should follow Prabhupada, and ISKCON says no, we should follow the traditions, or both says we should follow Prabhupada? So for example, the example of authorizing women to do certain things which they're traditionally not authorized to do, isn't it that we still want to do that?
Well, that particular tradition, in other words, there's a scope, okay? So, you know, you hear this thing called time and place, right? That clause that the Acharya has the, in fact, that's what makes the whole parampara, which another, by the way, another thing that the whole RtVik thing just completely destroys. Because time is moving forward. And actually, Bhakti Vikasa made a really good example, which they totally belittled. He said, the cell phones weren't around when Prabhupada was here. That just came up in the last 20 years, let's say. So now somebody has to make some decisions about cell phones can be incredibly useful and valuable, but they can also be a huge distraction, and there's a lot of nasty stuff out on the cell phone, or the what do you call it, the World Wide Web, right? So somebody has to, you know, Prabhupada didn't talk about it. So what is it? Oh, yeah, we can do whatever we want, because Prabhupada, it's not in his books anywhere, so I guess I can use it to check out pornography and go do whatever I want to do, because there's no instructions against it. That's the kind of mentality they have. Well, if it wasn't spoken by Prabhupada, then I guess it's an open field. So the point is that there are places where the current Acharya has the knowledge of Krishna consciousness, where he may, if he knows some disciple, forget pornography, just watching sports, or there's a million things you can get distracted on with cell phones. I mean, some people, I know people who come to my program, some people come to the program and they're playing on their cell phone when you're giving a lecture. I almost guarantee, I haven't heard this, but I almost guarantee you, if somebody was in here playing on their phone when Bhakti Vikasa is lecturing, he's probably going to say, turn it off. He said it this morning. I want, you know, when you're hearing kata, you want to give it 100%. Well, in the RtVik world, hey, there's no rule against it, so I can just, you know, listen to a tape of Prabhupada and play on my computer and do whatever I want to do. Okay? So I found, is that okay? let me read this, and maybe we'll have to shut down. So here's this is a pretty healthy paragraph, but for those people who, Prabhu asked for the quote from the Hari Bhakti Vilas, this might be a good thing to end on. And I'll see if I can, and I've actually got each sentence notated as to what verse it is in the Bhakti, and this is right out of the translation. Okay. And some points are going to be more emphatic than others, but the prospective spiritual master and disciple should live together for 1 year. In this way, they should come to understand each other's nature. Then it will be known whether the spiritual master is a genuine spiritual master and the disciple a genuine disciple. There is no other way to know this. The spiritual master should not give initiation without first living for a year with his disciple. Now, the RtViks say, well, Prabhupada didn't do that. Well, he did in the beginning, but as a matter of urgency, he had to pull away from that. So again, this is a case of you don't change the rule because of the exception. That's a bad policy, okay? He should examine his prospective disciple. The prospective disciple should live with his wealth, body, and pleasing words, serve his spiritual master for 3 years. Then, when the spiritual master is satisfied, the disciple may ask for initiation in chanting the sacred mantras. The disciple should regularly fetch water, kucha grass, flowers, and fuel. He should regularly wash the spiritual master's clothes, anoint him with sandal paste, and massage his limbs. Never should the disciple sleep on the spiritual master's bed, wear his shoes, sit on his seat, cross his shadow, or eat from his plate. The disciple should prepare his spiritual master's toothbrush twig and other things like that, and he should ask what service he can perform. The disciple should not leave without first asking permission. He should always try to please his spiritual master. He should never place his feet near the spiritual master, and never yawn, laugh, snap his fingers, or do other impolite activities. The disciple should offer the same kind of respect and treatment to the spiritual master's children, wife, and relatives. Never should the disciple sleep in the spiritual master's bed, sit on his seat, use his vehicle, wear his shoes, use his footstool, bath or his bathing water, or step on his shadow. Whenever one sees his spiritual master, one should offer obeisances to him with folded hands. One should fall like a stick to the ground. One should fall like a tree cut at its root. One should not eat anything without first taking permission from his spiritual master. Whenever the spiritual master approaches, the disciple should go to meet him. When he departs, the disciple should should follow him. I think that means when he departs, like to a different city or something. Hold on, we're almost done. The disciple should follow. Whatever food and drink the spiritual master likes, whatever pleasure his heart, the disciple should offer to his spiritual master. When the spiritual master is finished eating, the disciple may eat the remnants of his meal. He should do this every day. Even if the spiritual master hits him or gives him trouble, the disciple should not act to displease him. The disciple should never disrespect his spiritual master's words. The disciple should never act to displease the spiritual master. A disciple who with his life, wealth, actions, mind, and words pleases his spiritual master goes to the supreme destination. How do you do all that if your spiritual master's not there? This is why they want to throw the scripture out. Or maybe in their world. I can do it in front of a pitcher. Oh, yeah. Fetch the toothbrush for the pitcher. Yeah, I mean, you can rationalize anything. Sometimes in my preaching in Ohio, I say, there's a bar in every city where there's some guy sitting at the end of the bar, and he's half drunk, and he's going, come on over here, I'm going to tell you what the truth is. And we've all met people like that. And the RtViks are saying, come on over here. We're going to tell you a problem. We read the July 9th letter, and it says right there, the RtViks were never terminated. Yeah, there's certain things you don't have to say. They want an order. Lord Chaitanya gave the order. Prabhupada said we follow Lord Chaitanya. Where's the problem? Again, it's not about the RtVik. It's about something going on inside these people. They can't really surrender. They don't trust. They might, we're going to end here, but they might have had some real psychological or tormenting experience. They couldn't trust their father. I mean, there's probably a lot of that right there. They had a bad father. They had a drunk father, or a father who beat him, or all sorts of stuff. I mean, I've heard stories where people had parents that were so bad, he spent more of his time under the house than in the house because he couldn't stand going in his own house. And they say if you're having a problem with your mother, or if you're having a problem out in the street and you have a problem with your mother's an alcoholic, for example, and you go out in the street and somebody treats you bad, what do most people do? They run home and grab onto their mother's skirt. But what if your mother is the person who's treating you bad? Then where do you go? So if you've had those kind of issues, yeah, you probably don't want to surrender to anybody because you don't trust anybody. And that's where samsaras come in. And unfortunately, that has a big impact on the way we see the world, which is why it's so important that people are brought into the world in a loving relationship with devotees and treated properly and educated properly. And then they'll think properly. So, thank you all very much for your patience. I hope it was useful. Hare Krishna. I got it in writing.